right. We say welcome to anybody who's watching by YouTube today. Glad that you chose to be part of our time together in Bible study. Glad for all who are here today. We are in 2nd Chronicles. We're looking at chapters 4 and 5 today. We're still talking about Solomon's temple. We've been talking about it for a long time. Today we're going to think about, last week we talked about the construction of it and some of the elements related to the construction of it. And today we begin by thinking about the furniture and other items that were brought into the temple for use. And then in chapter 5 we talk about the dedication service that is being held. We'll just read through that whole of chapter 4. It's descriptive of what went on, and so it reads pretty much straightforward, but then we'll come back and talk about the individual parts a little bit after we do that. So it's a continuation, really, of what he was talking about last week. He was talking about the construction of the building itself, and here he's talking about the furniture and other elements that were to be brought into the temple. He made an altar of bronze, 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 10 cubits high. Then he made the cast sea. It was round, 10 cubits from rim to rim, and 5 cubits high. A line of 30 cubits would encircle it completely. Under it were panels all round, each of 10 cubits, surrounding the sea. There were 2 rows of panels cast when it was cast. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea was set on them. The hindquarters of each were towards the inside. Its thickness was a handbreadth. Its rim was made like the rim of a cup, like the flower of a lily. It held 3,000 baths. He also made 10 basins in which to wash, and set 5 on the right side and 5 on the left. In these they were to rinse what was used for the burnt offering. The sea was for the priests to wash in. Let's stop there. I've given you that map, and I don't have my copy up here. Oh, here it is. Yeah. I've given you the illustrations there of the temple. And if you look at the one, the straightaway, the one that has the building itself, you will see this is the sea, the cast sea. It's sometimes called the laver. It's sometimes called the molten sea. And that's what he was describing when he talked about it was set on 4 cast images of oxen. They're pointing in the 4 directions, east, north, west, and south. And that's the big sea. That would hold about 11,000 gallons of water, 17 feet in diameter. So it's no small thing. You see the altar over here to the side. He talked about that first. The altar of bronze, 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, 10 cubits high. I'm not sure what the measurements are on that, but it's a pretty massive kind of structure. And as you can see, that altar was used to offer offerings to Almighty God. Sometimes we get mistaken and we think that they went into the temple to make sacrifices. No, they made the sacrifices outside. And as we said last week, the worshipers didn't go into the temple building. They stayed outside the temple building. They never were allowed into the temple building. That's not like a church. We come into the church sanctuary. You didn't do that. You would stay outside. If we transposed it to what we do today, you all would be outside, and the worship leaders would carry off everything in here, and you all just be out there, and we, communicate whatever to you, however we would do it. Maybe we'd let you make some sacrifices out there. Of course, we'd always take your money, but have an offering. But so that's for offering sacrifices there. The big pool was for the priests to ceremonially cleanse themselves. Some scholars believe that the priests actually themselves got in it and immersed themselves in it. That's, not sure, but that's one line of thought. But it was used to help for them to purify themselves before they started carrying out the sacrifices. These are those 10 basins out along the side. They had wheels on them and they could be moved around. And as the text tells us, they were to wash. He also made 10 basins in which to wash and set 5 on the right side and 5 on the side. And these, they were to rinse what was used for the burnt offering. And so anything related to the burnt offerings could be ceremonially cleaned by the water in these 10 basins. So those were outside. So everything outside the temple here is what's described in this first section that the chroniclers is telling us about. All right, go back to the text. We go inside the temple, which you're not allowed to go into. He made 10 golden lampstands as prescribed. Remember, he got the directions from the Almighty through Moses, and then David reiterated those instructions. He made 10, and he is always referring to Solomon. And no, it's not Solomon himself. It's Solomon as king making sure it gets done. So he made 10 golden lampstands as prescribed and set them in the temple, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north side. He also made 10 tables and placed them in the temple, 5 on the right-hand side and 5 on the left. And he made 100 basins of gold. He made the court of the priests and the great court, and doors for the court he overlaid with their doors with bronze. He set the sea at the southeast corner of the house. The sea is this big pool of water, okay? And the courts outside, he's talking about out and around the temple, those courts, the court for the priests, which would be right at the temple, and then a court beyond that for the people. And so they would have walls, gates that you would go through to get into those courts, and the priest, of course, would go into the innermost gate and court. But to see what we're talking about on the inside, get that other side, turn it over to the other side, and you see the cutaway of the temple. And he's talking about the 10 golden lampstands. And it's believed that the golden lampstands and the 10 tables were made together. It doesn't show it in this picture, but they were made together. The lampstand sat on the table somehow or another, or was constructed into that. But you see the lampstands, 5 on one side, 5 on the other side. Doesn't talk about it here, but we'll talk about it at another point. That is the altar that offered up the incense before Almighty God, continual incense offered up before Almighty God. There's also a table in there that you can see that has the little round things. That's the table of the presence of the Lord, the table that held the bread of the presence. The bread of the presence, 12 loaves of bread that were brought in each week, or whenever, I think it's a weekly kind of thing, they were refreshed. The 12 loaves of bread represented what? The tribes of the Lord, tribes of Israel. And that they were in the holy place. This is the holy place, and then the Holy of Holies is behind the curtain. So that the loaves are on the table in the presence of God. The Holy of Holies represents the presence of God. The only person who could ever go into the Holy of Holies was the priest on the Day of Atonement. But that was where God dwelt. And so the 12 loaves being in the presence of God signified the fact that the 12 tribes of Israel were always in the presence of God. God was always watching over them, and they were to live as if they were in the presence of God all the time. Remember, they're called to be a nation of priests, holy unto the Lord. So they were to live their lives as if they were living them right before the Lord at all points and times. When you go home from church, and when you come to church, you act differently, don't you? When you come to church, you got your Sunday best on, not just your clothes, but your behaviors. When you get home and you take your Sunday best clothes off, you yell at your spouse or yell at your kids or yell at somebody because they didn't do something right or whatever, and the real you comes out, right? So when you're in the presence of the Lord in his house, you act differently than you do when you're in your own house. And so Israel was to see itself as always in the presence of the Lord and to act accordingly. So the 10 lampstands that he talks about here and the 10 tables, and you see how they're set up in there. The 100 basins of gold, we're going to talk about basins and pots and forks and shovels. All of these are utensils that are used in the temple, used in the sacrificial system. Boiling the meat, boiling the flesh off the meat to make ready the part that would be sacrificed. The pots would be used for that. Water from outside would be used from that. And the shovels would be used for the ashes from the burning of the incense or burning of the sacrifices. So everything had a purpose, but everything was made of gold or bronze because it was handling the sacrifices of Almighty God. So this second section brings us into the temple to kind of look around a little bit, and so we get a peek at some of what's in there. Back to the text, verse 11. And Hiram, remember Hiram is the king of Tyre, and he had agreed at Solomon's request to provide timber and a special servant, a master craftsman named Hiram Abi, probably a title meaning Hiram's servant, but he's called Hiram Abi. That's the special servant who acts in this day as Bezalel acted in the day when the tabernacle was made. And so, verse 11, and Hiram, that is the king of Tyre, made the pots. Again, he's not making them himself. He's having them made. He's seeing to it that they are made. He is the king. And Hiram made the pots, the shovels, and the basins. Thus, Hiram finished the work that he did for King Solomon on the house of God. The 2 pillars, he's going to give a description now of what he provided. The 2 pillars outside the temple, the bowls and the 2 capitals on the top of the pillars, and the 2 lattice works to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were put on the top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 lattice works, 2 rows of pomegranates for each lattice work to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the pillars. He made the stands, the basins on the stands, the 1 sea and the 12 oxen underneath it. The pots, the shovels, the forks, and all the equipment for these Hiram Abi made of burnished bronze for King Solomon for the house of the Lord. In the plain of the Jordan, the king cast them in the clay ground between Succoth and Zeradah. That's just saying that they were cast in probably earthen ovens that were known to be used for such things. But he's just giving the location of where all these objects had been cast. They had to be in fire and had to be cast in certain ways. And there were some ovens, evidently, in the plain of Jordan between these 2 cities. Verse 18, Solomon made all these things in great quantities so that the weight of the bronze was not determined. Solomon, of course, is over Hiram. Hiram is serving at Solomon's pleasure. Hiram's most capable servant is taking a lead in this. We've given a list of all the different things, but Solomon is the one who's making all these things. Solomon is the one who is overseeing the whole project. Hiram is a underseer of it. And is making sure that all these things get done. But you see all of those things thus far. So go to the next section. So Solomon made all the things that were in the house of God. the golden altar, the tables for the bread of the presence, the lampstands and their lamps of pure gold to burn before the inner sanctuary as prescribed, the flowers, the lamps, and the tongs of purest gold, the snuffers, basins, ladles, and fire pans of pure gold. As for the entrance to the temple, the inner doors to the most holy place and the doors of the nave of the temple were of gold. So he's just reiterating everything we've been saying, but he's making you think again. The doors that would have allowed entrance into, remember, this is the holy place, and this is the Holy of Holies back here, number 9, where the Ark of the Covenant was to reside. But the doors that led into the nave of the temple they weren't made of pure gold, is believed, but rather were made of fine wood and then overlaid with gold sheeting. But they, of course, covered the entrance of the way into the temple. Do you see the 2 pillars there at the beginning? Those were both described. The tops of them, the ornamentation at the top is has been described with the pomegranates and beautiful kind of thing. I'll have to see if I can't come up with a rendering of that for you to see, but they were very ornate. Again, this is the house of the Lord. Everything's going to be made of the finest materials. Everything's going to be ornate. Everything's going to be glorious and good. The parts that can be seen from the outside are small, few and far between, because only the priests could go into the holy place, and only the chief priest could go into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement. Not a small project. And again, as we've been stressing, Solomon was charged and felt led to make it the most glorious building on the place of earth. Why? This is the place where God is going to dwell on earth. And that's what we turn to in chapter 5 in just a second. So everything, as I said last week, we closed last week talking about how the glory of the interior, which you can see from the cutaway, that wasn't made for human beings. That was made for God. If God is to dwell in this place, then God is to see the best that human beings can put before him. The finest materials, the most glorious designs done by the greatest craftsmen, skilled craftsmen. It's for God's glory. This is where he will dwell. And so it's all for God. It's not for human beings. The average human being, the average worshiper, only saw the outside of the temple. Those 2 pillars were the most glorious things that they saw at the doorway. Any thoughts or questions about any of that? There was no sacrifice in the temple. No sacrifice in here. The incense right there, that's incense, the smoke of incense rising up. And that was always before God. And that was the only kind of sacrifice inside the temple. Everything else took place outside the temple on the great altar. Yeah, we all have that misconception because we always talk about going to the temple to offer offerings and sacrifices, and we think, going into the temple. No, it was done out in front of the temple. Now, the priests, of course, they would change out the bread on the table of the presence. They would change that out weekly. Remember the story in the Bible about David when his men are hungry and they go into the temple to get bread? He gets bread from the temple. He didn't himself go in the temple, but he took bread that the priests provided for him from that table, and that was sacred bread. So So there's that reference to it, but the bread would be changed out, and I believe the priests and Levites, or at least just the priests, were allowed to eat that bread. Yes. I don't know. Yeah. Right. That was their pay, part of their pay. But yeah, everything, making sure the lampstands were lit, all those kinds of things. That's what the priest went into the temple, the holy place, to take care of. Those basins also would be used to sprinkle the blood on the altar, the Day of Atonement, or to sprinkle blood on the altar outside, part of the ritual of the sacrifices. But anyway, a lot of what scholars had to do is try to read back into it and figure out exactly what went on. And so there's a lot that is known and a lot that's an educated guess about what took place actually. But we do know that basically it looked kind of like this. This is a good rendering of it, the Temple of Solomon. And these are the kind of acts that took place in the temple court, day in and day out. As I said, the temple is meant to be the God's dwelling place. Now, obviously the Israelites didn't think, oh, well, this is where God lives and he no longer lives in heaven. No, this is where he dwelt among his people when he was on earth, however he was on earth. And I've never read where they've gotten, real specific about how that presence was made known, just that his presence was believed to be in the Holy of Holies. He was believed to be present there in some manifestation of his eternal, infinite power and glory, and that it was a place where he dwelt among his people. So we talk about them bringing the Ark of the Covenant into the temple. Remember, before we get to this, the story when David brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem before the temple was built. You read about it in 2 Samuel 6, and I think it's also in 1 Chronicles. I can't remember where, but they brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. It had been kept in a city outside of Jerusalem after it was taken back from the Philistines. And David wanted to bring it in. David wanted to make his holy city be the city where worship was carried out, to be the center of life in Israel. And so David brought the Ark of the Covenant in. Remember, the first time he did it, he didn't do it the right way. And so as the cart bumped that it was located on, it was supposed to be carried on the poles by the Levites, and David didn't do it that way for whatever reason, ignorance or indifference. And when the cart, shook as it went over a rocky patch, and the ark started to fall off, and Uzzah reached out his hand to steady it, and Uzzah was struck dead. And so we talked about that in a sermon several months back. So the second time, David left it right where it was when all that happened, in the care and keep of a priestly family. And then he came back later and transported it the right way into Jerusalem. But now it needs to be brought into the temple. And that's what's being done here. The house for the Ark of the Covenant, the house for God, has been completed. And now we're bringing the Ark of the Covenant in. We're bringing God into his temple. So the first verse in chapter 5, is a good segue from what we just read to what we're going to read. Thus all the work that Solomon did for the house of the Lord was finished. Solomon brought in the things that his father David had dedicated and stored, the silver, the gold, and all the vessels in the treasuries of the house of God. Not only those precious materials, but also, as we're going to see, all the materials of the tabernacle. All the furnishings for the tabernacle and all the materials, the tent itself and all that is going to be brought into the temple and be kept in some of these anterooms, their storage rooms, and that's where all these precious objects would be kept and stored. The tabernacle is no longer to be in use. Now the temple is to be the central place where God's people are to worship. Verse 2, then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the leaders of the ancestral houses of the people of Israel in Jerusalem, to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which is Zion. And all the Israelites assembled before the king at the festival that is in the 7th month. That festival is the festival of booths or tabernacles. The 7th month was roughly the month of September, October on our calendars. And I've got it written down there. It's Tishri, I think it is. The festival of booths, the tabernacles, celebrated Israel's wilderness journey. When Israel was in the wilderness, they had to make dwelling places for themselves, portable dwelling places for themselves. The tabernacle was a portable house for God because they were traveling across. Now they're in the promised land, and they are established. This is the land God promised Abraham, and now they're established in it. And now the Lord's house, the tabernacle, is to be established as a permanent house here. This is God's holy city, and God's people are here, and God himself is here among his people. That's the meaning behind all this. So that it's being done at the festival of tabernacles or booths is appropriate because looking back, everything was in process, was portable on a journey. Now everything has been established in the promised land, the land that God has given his people. Verse 4, and all the elders of Israel came, and the Levites carried the ark. Important note, the Levites, Solomon's not going to make the mistake David made that first time. The Levites are carrying the ark. That was their job. They had special poles made for it to do that, to prevent them from handling the ark themselves. This is how it's supposed to be transported. So they brought up the ark, the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. The priests and Levites brought them up. King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel who had assembled before him were before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and oxen that they could not be numbered or counted. You would expect that. We're bringing God into his house. We're bringing Almighty Holy God into this house that has been built for him, and so they're sanctifying the procession all along the way. They're offering sacrifices to God all along the way. Verse 7, then the priests brought the ark of the covenant of the Lord to its place in the inner sanctuary of the house, in the most holy place. Again, you look on your picture where number 9 is. That's the Holy of Holies. That's where the Ark of the Covenant is. We read last week about the seraphim and the wings and all, and they are situated under that the statues there representing the protection, the guardianship over the most holy object in Israel's history. Then the priest brought the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord to its place in the inner sanctuary of the house, in the most holy place, underneath the wings of the cherubim. For the cherubim spread out their wings over the place of the ark, so that the cherubim made a covering above the ark and its poles. The poles were so long that the ends of the poles were seen from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, but they could not be seen from outside. They are there to this day. That's just a little reference point that means he's quoting material. He's quoting from somebody who wrote this at the time that all this had taken place, or after that period of time when this had taken place. Verse 10, there was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets that Moses put there at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the people of Israel after they came out of Egypt. The 2 tablets are the stone tablets inscribed by God with what we call the Ten Commandments. The significance of this is that convocation God called with his people on Mount Sinai, where he called them to be a holy people, a nation of priests. He consecrated them as they had come out of Egypt. Early on, when they came out of Egypt and were in the wilderness, they came to Mount Sinai, and God consecrated them as his people, and he gave them his laws. And living by his laws, was how they made themselves holy unto the Lord. Verse 11, now when the priests came out of the holy place, for all the priests who were present had sanctified themselves without regard to their divisions. All the Levitical singers, Asaph, Heman, Jeduthun, their sons and kindred, arrayed in fine linen, with cymbals, harps, and lyres, stood east of the altar with 120 priests who were trumpeters. It was the duty of the trumpeters and singers to make themselves heard in unison in praise and thanksgiving to the Lord. And when the song was raised with trumpets and cymbals and other musical instruments in praise to the Lord, and they said, "For he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever." That's a famous catchline phrase that's used throughout the book of Psalms. God, for the Lord is good, and his steadfast love endures forever. God's steadfast love, his hesed love, steadfast love, never-ending love, never conquered love, endures forever. God's love for his people can never, ever end. It is there forever. And so they praise God's love, his steadfast love for them. The house of the Lord was filled with a cloud when all this took place, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of God. The Ark of the Covenant represented God's presence. And so as they brought it in and situated it in the Holy of Holies, then they responded with praise. Remember at the end of 1 Chronicles, David organizes the Levites and the priests into various corps of service, and the Levites, he made the choirs and the musicians. He had companies of choirs and musicians, and their job was to lead in the worship of God. And so they're here at the installation of the Ark of the Covenant in the temple, and they're leading the worship of God as he brings this about. So on the way in, they're offering sacrifices, and after they have installed the Ark of the Covenant, then they offer other sacrifices of music and praise. All this sets the stage. The service isn't ended. It's going to carry on in the next chapter that we'll look at next week, where Solomon will offer his prayer of dedication. John?
What was the purpose of all the blood sacrifices that went on when the priests did the temple and when they brought the Ark of the Covenant? What was the purpose?
All the sacrifices? They wouldn't be the once a year atonement sacrifice, but they would be sacrifices for sin. There would have been a variety of sacrifices offered, number one, and there were certain sacrifices that had to do with seeking forgiveness for sin. There were other sacrifices that were made as thanksgiving sacrifices, a recognition that God had provided all that they had. Kind of like our offering, when we bring our offering to the altar, we take that practice from their offering of certain sacrifices to God for his blessings of life, all the things he's provided. There were those kinds of sacrifices. There were peace offerings that were made at time that are a little bit different. I'll bring next week, I've got a list of the sacrifices and what they mean. And I'll bring that next week and we'll take a look at that. Yes, praise as well. Often the, what do they call them? I can't pull it out of my head right now. But they would make a vow. They would make vows and offer offerings with vows, promising because of God's blessing upon them, they would vow something that they would do for God, and there would be an offering offered up with that at the same time as to substantiate that. But I'll bring a list next week that kind of breaks down what many of those sacrifices are and how they would have carried them out. But yeah, all those sacrifices related to purification of sin, thanks to God, asking for God's blessing, recognizing His blessing, peace offerings,
Some were from individuals making sacrifices, and some were from the whole.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. The whole. I think they would all be representative of the whole of the people, as they're coming, rather than as individual sacrifices. Because,
I was wondering if individuals could do their own sacrifice.
again, a good question that I don't know we have an answer to. I think the working assumption is that they had planned, and Solomon is in charge of all this, and so Solomon is offering sacrifices for himself as king. And certainly some of those would have been about sin, covering sin. Some of those would have been about blessing and seeking blessing.
But what made me think of it was when Abraham made the sacrifice and he was going to sacrifice Isaac, but he didn't.
Right.
And so maybe up until the time they did the temple, individuals could.
Well, yeah, now, in regular services, yes, in daily services and things, yes, you could come before the temple and offer sacrifices. But in terms of this procession to the temple and the installation of the Holy of Holies, I think those would be just corporate. Yeah. People could come before. Yeah. I'll bring that information next week and show you. And it also has information about some of the priestly duties in the temple and that type of stuff. And that'll help to, while we're here and while we're thinking about the temple, it's good to kind of clarify a lot of what went on in that worship. Sherry? There are several elements to the pomegranate. There's something, there's the pomegranate itself, and then I saw the word for it, and I don't know what it means. If it's like a top, like the part of the root or whatnot. And so that's why I'll bring next week, too, more of a close-up of how that was incorporated into those pillars at the top. The decorative element at the top had the pomegranates in it. The priestly linens had pomegranates sewn, figures sewn into the hem. The pomegranate itself was a symbol of abundance, of fruitfulness. In New Testament times, or for the church, it represents the resurrection of all God's people. Because when you cut it and open it up and there's all these seeds in there, that fruitfulness and all the seeds represents, the abundance of life. And so it had, for the Old Testament, had more of that immortality ideal and fruitfulness, blessing, abundant blessing, which of course, God is the source of all blessing, and God is the source of life, and God is never ending. He is always. There is no beginning or end. God always is. And so He is the one immortal thing in all this world. And so all of that attached to its use in the decoration of the temple. But I'll try to see if I can find that. It's like the top leafy area of it or something like that I think was actually incorporated into the top of the pillar, the ornamentation at the top of the pillar. I'm sorry? Yeah. That's right. But I'll try to make that clear next week with some pictures. Thank you all. Oh, John?
I was thinking specifically about the passage where it said so many animals were sacrificed that they were accountable. And that was the point where the Ark of the Covenant was brought in.
Yes. As they were bringing it in, they were offering sacrifices on the altar outside the temple, as the procession is coming towards the temple, they were offering sacrifices and sacrifices and sacrifices. And, I think that's on behalf of all Israel and probably on behalf of Solomon as king of Israel, that those sacrifices are offered. But the abundance of sacrifices, it's not just for one sin, but it's for all the sins, and it's for, the desire of the people to be a holy people. Remember, at the very first of chapter 4, it emphasizes that all Israel was gathered. There were representatives from all Israel. And so the idea is that all Israel is represented here because this is Jerusalem, the holy city of all Israel. And so the sacrifices would have represented all of Israel as well. But the sacrifices were seen to please God. And so, if one sacrifice pleases God, 10,000 pleases him too, much more, right? And so it's the effusion of those sacrifices. You're overdoing it, but you're overdoing it for the right reason. This is Almighty God. We're bringing him into his temple. And so, it's the number of sacrifices on top of sacrifices on top of sacrifices that says this is no small thing we're doing here. We mean to be his holy people, and we're sanctifying this place because this is the holy dwelling place of God. I mean, there's a whole bunch of meanings, I think, attached to it.
It's hard to comprehend that many offerings.
They were very busy that day. Of course, they had thousands of priests. It was a very busy place. I mean, we see this and we think, gosh, it just looks so forlorn, right? But it was filled with people. It was filled with priests doing their work and, cutting up animals and getting them ready to be sacrificed. I mean, there was a whole lot of hubbub going on outside the temple as this procession was coming near. And they were offering up sacrifices. Again, the sacrifice represented, reconciliation between God and his people. It represented peace between God and his people. And so, you just. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Thank you all. Thanks to all who have been watching by YouTube. We'll be back next week. I'm not going to be here Sunday, just by the way. Just